Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 9 of season 5 of Babylon 5 in the Kingdom of the Blind. It seems that there's been an uptick in raider activity as Garibaldi discusses recent ranger reports with Delenn and Sheridan. But seems is the operative word, as Sheridan realises that the vessel's hits still had their cargoes on board. Raiders attack for profit, knocking out comms and emptying cargo holds. Garibaldi notes that these are more like military strikes. They hit victims so hard and fast that no distress signals have been received and no survivors found. The activity is widespread, suggesting something other than a mere border conflict. So a very competent aggressor is carrying out these attacks all along aligned shipping lines, likely leading to alliance members randomly blaming each other unless the Rangers can get hard proof of who is actually to blame. As the opening closes out, we see another vessel being destroyed, and the sharp-eyed Aeneid could take an educated guess as to who the aggressor was. Minister Vitari thinks Londo is joking when he introduces Jakar as his bodyguard on Centauri Prime, rather than his entertainment. He isn't, of course. Jakar inquires when it's time to eat, as he's starving. Sundown, apparently, is the time to eat. Interestingly, Byron is chairing a meeting of telepaths which feels as if chronologically the last episode was possibly out of place somehow, but in any event, he notes that the majority of telepaths are in fact Vorlon produced, as was revealed by Lita's mind burst to the others a couple of episodes ago. He acknowledges what Lita says, that they are who they are now, no matter if they were engineered for a war which is now ended. Yet his view remains as it was, that they have had an opportunity for a normal life taken away. They were created as disposable tools. With the first ones gone, they are nonetheless their legacy. He believes that whilst they might in a sense be abandoned, there is another way, but a dangerous one. Londo meets with an old friend, Jano. Londo asks after the Regent, and the news is both not good but also puzzling, as he has been in seclusion for a couple of months. However, palace staff have seen him wandering the corridors at night, talking to himself until spotted. On one occasion he even asked the guard to kill him, saying he was not himself, but he was quite drunk at the time. Londo quickly notes that that's very unusual, because in all the time he's known the Regent, he has never known him to drink. In fact, not drinking was his one vice as compared with other Centauri. Jano agrees too that the palace is a lot quieter than it was under Cartagia, as if some darkness had settled over it. Jano also notes that seemingly normal reports around fleet information, grain and ore shipments that he would normally be privy to have become top secret. So he is pleased to see Londo back, as he hopes he might be able to determine what is going on. He bids him good night. As Jano returns to his quarters, the lighting system doesn't respond to him, so he picks up a portable light source and hears a sound. The Regent sat in his dark quarters. They exchange pleasantries, yet the Regent seems distant, drifting into past happy memories and saying that if it were up to him, he would never let anyone hurt Jano, but that it isn't up to him anymore. With that, Jano glances round, eyes widen, and he is thrown against the wall to drop motionless onto the ground. On the station, the council finalises its business, but Sheridan notes that it will all kick off not long after, because they're disclosing the updated information on shipping attacks later that day. As the ambassadors make their way back to their own quarters, we see that they've acquired telepathic trails, and back at the colony, Byron confirms to Lita that it's begun and they're committed. To what exactly we don't know, but it's clear he's going to be counting on her heavily over the next 24 hours. She asks him if he's afraid, telepathically. He replies, constantly. On Centauri Prime, Londo is still trying to see the Regent in the royal court, and then asks where Jano is. Minister Vitari is suitably disgruntled, but goes to look for him. Another Centauri then tries to bait Jakar into flogging the guard who nearly whipped him to death in front of Cartagia. For a moment, it almost looks as if he might, but then he stops, having in turn baited the Centauri, and notes that the guard had no choice in what he did. Cartagia was the heart and the voice driving his action. He's gone, and Jakar has no desire to inflict the same pain himself. A disturbed Vitari returns to get Londo as Jakar blows a kiss to a Centauri noblewoman. Jano has been found hung in his quarters, but both Jakar and Londo agree that there was no way this was a suicide. On the station, Byron kicks his plans up a notch by using his talents to suggest to Mr. Garibaldi that he needs to put something in front of the council simultaneously for it to retain its credibility. Having gotten over that hurdle, he then deviates from talking about his bluff subject and hits them with their reports on the Vaughan's creation of telepaths. When his demand for a homeworld is outright rejected by Sheridan, he then applies pressure by noting that his telepaths have been following the ambassadors for 2 days, and if they don't provide a world, every secret they now know will be out in the open. After this piece of blackmail has been delivered, Garibaldi is berating himself for not seeing it coming and not having written "Don't trust telepaths" on the back of his eyelids. But Sheridan notes that to this point they've actually been providing solid intelligence for the ISA. He also notes that unless they've managed to deep scan all the ambassadors, all they really have is surface thoughts. But as Delenn notes, the assumption will be that they know all the most sensitive secrets, and the ambassadors are likely to react accordingly. Delenn is more open to them having a valid argument than the males present, but Sheridan says they've taken action in an inconvenient way, which Delenn reminds him is what the current Earth President said to him about his action to take down Clark. Sheridan takes some comfort from it just being a political issue, but Garibaldi adds, for now, to that observation. Vitari summons Londo to the Regent's bedchamber, but as he and G'Kar make their way there, they realise they have picked up company. As G'Kar moves to deal with the attackers, a solid wall slides into place to separate him from Mollari, who is then faced by the Centauri who baited G'Kar earlier, who says he is in the way for his ambitions. He hurls a knife at Londo, which suddenly slows, stops, and reverses back towards Londo's attacker, bringing him down. Londo spins to see an unknown creature with glowing red eyes standing behind him, presumably responsible for blocking the attack. As the wall separating him from G'Kar pulls back up as the creature vanishes, then G'Kar suggests they vacate the area in case more assailants are present. Byron's plan doesn't last long because one of the group has chosen to go out for supplies alone. Byron knew they were safest staying together and quiet because they've painted a target on themselves at this point, and Lita is the first to realise the risk has crystallised as a group of Drazi assault the lone telepath, demanding to know if he was the one who followed their ambassador. A more belligerent telepath takes others with him to stop the Drazi attack. As Byron holds his head in his hands, all hopes of a peaceful resolution dashed as the Drazi are assaulted by their telepaths. Neither side is unharmed. And so Sheridan finds himself in a deeply inconvenient position as Zack arrives to an otherwise deserted council chamber to see what he wants to do. There is clearly consensus from the ambassadors that they be apprehended, but Lockley is respectful of the fact that they were given protection by Sheridan when they arrived, although she also told Zack to remind Sheridan that she thought this was a bad idea from the outset. Sheridan doesn't necessarily disagree that the telepaths are owed something, but right now they can't be left free. So he rescinds his protection and asks Zack to bring them in. Byron, meanwhile, is planning to barricade his group in one area with their food supplies to try and hold out for as long as they can, in the hope that as time goes on and they effectively go on hunger strike, things will calm down and they will get sympathy. Unfortunately, the belligerent telepath from earlier has a different view and says that once his family waited thinking they wouldn't be taken, but they were. He advocates splitting up and releasing the information to show that they're in earnest so they can pressure them into a deal, fighting if necessary with weapons taken from the Drazi. And so the group fractures into two, with Lita, of course, remaining with Byron. G'Kar and Londo confront Vitari over his association with the Centauri who arranged the assault on them. He makes the mistake of saying the Regent will see them now, when he'd said the Regent was ready to see them earlier. Just then, a hand gestures towards Londo from behind Vitari's back, and he pulls G'Kar back, dismisses Vitari, and moves to follow the hand. Leaving G'Kar behind, Londo finally gets face to face with the Regent, who is his usual fast-speaking self. He says he was glad they were able to save Londo earlier, noting he was the only one who treated him with any respect during Gotage's time. The Regent knows he's been asking about ships and supplies, but they want him to let it go. Lando asks who they are, but the Regent waves it away, encouraging him to live life while he still can, as he will be Emperor soon, and he is sorry. He says they will speak once more before the end. Londo backs out of the room slowly and closes the doors behind him. G'Kar asks him what he learned, and he honestly says he doesn't know. Back behind the doors, a shadowed non-Centauri figure fixes the Regent with a stare as his keeper applies pressure to his throat, the Regent trying to assure him that he has said nothing. G'Kar is attempting to sleep, but Londo is awake and tells G'Kar that they will leave back to the station on the first transport the next day, having planned to stay for a month originally. He now finds the palace an uncomfortable place to be, which it wasn't even in Cartagia's time for him. He wonders what they could be doing with their ships, and we finally get confirmation that it is indeed Centauri ships that are attacking other Alliance ships. On the station, Lita and Byron share a bed as Zack announces that they know they've barricaded themselves in and encourages Lita to come out, along with anyone else who wishes to, because the other option involves them coming in. Byron says she could go, but she doesn't want to. He says that there will be a time when he asks her to leave him behind, and he hopes she will do so without question when that time comes. I'm actually quite glad we find out within this episode that it's Centauri ships attacking ISA traffic, because I actually think someone goofed in the intro and left in some CGI of Centauri engines. They're distinctively rectangular and their weapons always make a particular noise. I must admit, and this may be post-op brain fog talking, that I can't recall whether there was already some knowledge on Londo's part of there being odd things happening with Centauri supply lines. Jano clearly brings him up to speed on there being something happening, but of course he doesn't get much chance to give him a full breakdown before he's silenced. Which is a shame, because he seemed a pretty decent bloke for a Centauri. Overall, this is quite an interesting episode, taking us back to the Royal Court for the first time in a while, whilst also keeping the telepath side of things interesting. Perhaps slightly unusually, we get a reveal on what's going on with the shipping attacks before anyone inside the story knows. So the question for us as viewers is, now we know, how are others going to find out? Londo suspects something's going on, but the clamp down by the Regent's mysterious friends means that he hasn't been able to pull it all together. Nor do the Rangers have enough to go on at this point. So now all of a sudden we have a real challenge to the existence of the ISA, because it looks like a member world is attacking other member world ships. One wonders in fact whether Centauri ships have been attacked as well to try and mask the identity of the perpetrators. So now we seem to be shifting up from standalone episodes back towards a more overarching arc once again, like the show's had chance to catch its breath after its rescue. The interplay between G'Kar and Londo remains entertaining, as does G'Kar's treatment by the bemused denizens of the Royal Court. It still seems odd that G'Kar is seen as a mere bodyguard, of course, but that's the classic Centauri attitude towards the Narn. That being said, G'Kar proves perfectly capable of being in the bodyguard role, but the intriguing thing about the knife throw is whether it was a technological defence that saved Londo or a telekinetic one. If the latter, that would be an unusual power for a race to have in the Babylon 5 setting, and there are some clear possibilities, but let's see how it pans out. It was also really interesting to see that the guard brought back in an effort to provoke G'Kar. Just another example of how little credit they give either him personally or the Narn in general, and you can see Londo quietly smiling at why they can't understand why he didn't take the bait. The fact that G'Kar then takes him down a notch philosophically is great too. On the telepath side of the coin, I'm still not sure why Byron thought it would be a smart idea to use blackmail to rapidly pursue his newfound aim of forcing the ISA to give them a homeworld. A plight is no small thing to ask for, after all. You're basically talking about starting a colony from scratch on an entire world, and they'd be very easily conquered from space, which means they'd need protection. It just seems a very ill-conceived idea when they could have taken a much steadier approach and gradually built up a case. As is clearly demonstrated in this episode, whilst Byron preaches a very pacifist approach, he doesn't have the tight control over his fellows that he really needs to ensure his plans can come to fruition. So we see that almost immediately a group splinters off, not because they're particularly radical, but because they don't share his mindset. It's a really difficult thing because, of course, from the other side of the fence, whatever one telepath does will paint all the others with the same brush to a significant degree. Which I think is why Byron knows by the end of this episode that the situation is now completely out of his control. Yet he doesn't seem to recognise that it was his plan that's brought this down on them, and incredibly quickly too, although in fairness he did acknowledge it as being a dangerous course of action earlier on. I think what this episode arguably does is bring us back onto more familiar arc-driven ground. We've now established the ISA in the place of the looser amalgam of non-aligned worlds, and established that someone is already looking to put pressure on the new entity in a sophisticated fashion from which there will have to be some fallout, of course. Yes, the telepath storyline has been in the mix too, of course, but I'm not sure if I'd call it an arc as such, more of a recurring theme. Clearly that particular theme is also going to get crunchier now that Byron has managed to turn all the major races against his colony, and in so doing forced Sheridan to remove his protection for the colony. It also occurs to me that Bester was only being held at bay by a quarantine period, so really they've burnt all their bridges remarkably rapidly. It's interesting that Lita seems to be being offered an out by Zack. It'll be interesting to see how she comes out of all this ultimately. So it seems that things are heating up now as we get towards the middle of this season, and we will see where the telepath issue and where the Centauri strikes on shipping go, and whether or not Londo can figure out what's going on both with his ships and on Centauri Prime at the moment with the Regent. So with that, I will leave it there and catch you for the next one. Cheers for now.